Outgoing NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg visited the United States and Canada on June 21, 2024, ahead of the NATO-Washington NATO Summit in July. This will mark the final summit for Stoltenberg, as former Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte is expected to replace him in October. Despite his term ending, Stoltenberg is still attempting to strengthen NATO and lobby for support for his initiatives with NATO leaders. NATO was formed in 1949 as a collective defense agreement to protect and deter potential Soviet aggression in Central and Western Europe. Despite significant reductions in both its contributing armed forces and Russia's armed forces, NATO continued to exist, fulfilling its traditional role for a threat that did not seem to exist. NATO expanded its membership into Eastern Europe and former Soviet-aligned states, aiming to gain influence and argue that NATO was a force for European security and stability. However, the question remains: what kind of security does NATO offer? The Russian Federation, the largest European nation and non-NATO armed force, served as the progenitor of the Soviet Union, and NATO and its new Eastern European member states still saw Russia as a threat. NATO's strength lies in its Article 5 guarantees, which state that an attack on one is an attack on all, and all member states will come to the defense of the attacked state. Post-Cold War, Russia was not a significant threat to Europe, but the 2014 invasion of Ukraine in 2022 has elevated NATO to the forefront of European security due to its deep-rooted anti-Russian DNA. NATO's expansion policy played a role in the war, but it did not mean its member states took security seriously. The Ukraine war has revealed the atrophy of armed forces dedicated to NATO countries and policy disagreements among NATO countries over the conflict. NATO needs to find a middle ground in policy that will shore up countries' commitment to Article 5. If NATO pursues a policy without unanimous consent, it jeopardizes its existence when a unanimous Article 5 agreement is most crucial. The war in Ukraine has led to China becoming a focus for Europe and NATO, with European leaders interpreting Russia as a threat to European security. The war in Ukraine resulted in broad and harsh sanctions against Russia, but the Russian economy continues to grow and produce more war materials. China and Russia have maintained close ties throughout the war, and there are suspicions that China is assisting Russia in sustaining its war and expanding its defense industry. China's support and aggressive actions in the Western Pacific and the South China Sea have led Europe to label China a threat to European security. NATO has increased its contacts in Asia, leading to accusations from China that the U.S. is trying to add a NATO-like organization in the Pacific. Secretary Stoltenberg's efforts on behalf of NATO in Asia are not new, but the war has reignited the focus on Asia. The IP4 countries, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand have participated in NATO summits since 2022, providing important information on the region's security situation and potential impact on the rules-based order. These countries can aid NATO in addressing issues such as technology sharing, intelligence gathering, and cyber warfare. As European and U.S. defense industries struggle to support the war in Ukraine, these countries have emerged as important partners in supporting the conflict. France, seeing the China threat as an opportunity to increase its influence in Europe, partially opposes Stoltenberg's efforts, arguing that NATO needs to focus its resources on Europe. French President Emmanuel Macron argues that NATO struggles with its European defense commitments and does not have the capacity to focus on Asia. The U.S. does not want to establish NATO in Asia, but wants to leverage NATO military capabilities to move between Asia and Europe. The expansion of NATO into Europe is too extensive to garner full consensus, casting doubt on Article 5 guarantees, much less addressing consensus for expanding into the Indo-Pacific. IP4 plays a crucial role in both NATO and European security, while NATO also plays a crucial role in bolstering IP4's regional security, and that is the middle ground for Mark Rutte to find.